Thank you again so much for attending this session. This topic, quite honestly, is very, very much near and dear to my heart, and quite honestly, this is something that I'm super, super passionate about. So before I go into the meat of the conversation, I wanted to give a little short, brief background on myself. My name is Alice Wang. I currently am the VP of Customer Success for a fintech AI/ML startup called Auditoria.ai. And I essentially run the entire post-sales lifecycle for our customers and partners. So everything from onboarding and operationalizing our customers and partners, training and awareness, support, professional services, customer success and renewals, and trust and security, right? But what I will say is that I started out my career purely 100% in identity and access management. I stopped counting after 15 years in terms of how long I've been in the industry. And I've always constantly kept up to date. Because fundamentally, when I think about how do you build a high-performing team, especially in this particular, quite honestly, very difficult to find niche subject area, how do you build, how do you nurture, how do you scale this, right? At the end of the day, I've always been very, very thankful that identity and access management has been the foundation of, essentially my technical background ever since the start of my professional career. And because of that, right, I understand the challenges of having to hire, having to build a completely brand new team, or stepping in and essentially retooling a team, or continuing to reorganize and maturing a team. And today's session, I'm not giving you a blueprint, right? I'm not telling you step-by-step instructions of how to do X, Y, and Z so that you can successfully build a team. But as managers, first line, manager of managers, as well as individual contributors for building out and finding subject matter expertise in the identity and access management space, what I wanted to share with you today is lessons learned, as well as, quite honestly, I'm going to be very transparent, challenges that I've had over the years, because this stuff is hard, right? This stuff is truly, truly hard. So I wanted to take a step back and really hone in on why is this hard? Because this could apply to any type of hiring trajectory, right? So you go through sourcing, you get open headcount, you go through sourcing, you have to essentially understand the scope of responsibilities for what team are you really trying to build, right? Crafting an appropriate job description, working with your recruiters if you actually can get one, right? As well as sourcing. I will honestly remember that, when we think about building a team from scratch, I spent about 50% of my time, right? Just purely on sourcing. And it makes it doubly hard when you don't have good recruiters to work with, as well as a good, solid profile for what exactly you're looking for. But I'll get into that a little bit more. The second part here is really the interview and hiring stage for all of the candidates that you are lucky enough to source, right? Creating a consistent and fair interview round, crafting technical interviews, and negotiating, right? As well as negotiating hiring packages and start dates. And then finally, we get to onboarding, right? We get to onboarding, that also takes quite a while. And once they're onboarded, by the way, it's not to say that they're going to be self-sufficient and productive, right? You also have to continuously invest in this particular area, in this particular new team member. So with that as a foundation, right, in terms of building and onboarding a team really, really quickly, what I wanted to also highlight was Lance's previous session, for those of you who were there. If not, go and hopefully it's online after the conference. But it's really a very cyclical process, and here's why. Because fundamentally, what you're trying to do is building a career path for your team, but also to really understand how you're measuring each and every single individual so that you can start to figure out, okay, are they the right fit for the team, right? So let's start with the upper top, right? When we think about understanding your team's mission, your team's charter, and more importantly, a perceived success criteria, what does that exactly mean? It means as a manager, right, you have to articulate those things to your team, right? Perceived success criteria, how are they going to be measured? Once you know how are they going to be measured, what is it that you're trying to build, then comes truly the hard part. So in my case, right, when I think about sourcing, recruiting, and interviewing, right, it is about really standardizing at a foundational level across the board. So if you'll remember, Lance had said, or the previous session, right, we all want to look for unicorns, right, that really check off all of the boxes for all of the skills that we as deep identity and access management experts want to find and bring on board, right? The best of the best, the top talent in and of itself. But that's hard. So when you craft that, sourcing profile, right, in order to attract top talent, it's got to be consistent, especially if you're building across a global landscape, right? You can't have disparate sourcing profiles because you're going to confuse your recruiter, and then two, it's really difficult to manage, right? So streamline that sourcing profile, really take a good hard look at how do you set that standard at a global perspective, right? For example, if you're hiring for a support personnel, if you're hiring for a customer success architect, right? Don't try to write different types of profiles unless you're truly hiring for very specific product areas. So interviewing. So this is the part where as you start to get a little bit better in understanding how to source your candidates, as well as then how to, disregard the folks that just quite honestly don't fit, the right profile, the interview process also should be standardized, streamlined at a global perspective. And here's why. Because at the end of the day, once you start to really understand what it is that you're looking for in terms of business acumen, EQ, technical aptitude, you don't want to find somebody that truly, is going to cost you a whole heck of a lot too much, but also is just quite honestly super difficult to find. So that interview process is really about getting through from start to finish, right? From the first time the recruiter actually starts to talk to the candidate to when they exit and essentially you offer them, a hiring offer, an offer letter. That should be kept to essentially no more than 5 rounds, less than 4 weeks. And I think we've all experienced this hiring during the pandemic. One of the lessons that I had to learn and quite honestly failed pretty much at the very, very beginning. How do you hire and interview in the pandemic era? Over Zoom, not being in person, right? I can honestly say that was super hard. That was a huge lesson learned for me. Because when I think about how do I actually go and test somebody, how do I read their body language, how do I test their acumen for not only the technical aspects of identity and access management, but how do I do that quickly and consistently so that I measure, right, all of the candidates in the same way, fairness, that is going to be, why you want to really standardize the sourcing, standardize the interview process. And for the identity and access management space, what I will say is that this becomes, a little bit more nuanced because now you're trying to find expertise in a niche area, right? Somebody potentially that has privileged access management expertise, somebody that has, provisioning and access management expertise on certain products that then can be applied to the cloud, or has to have network knowledge, right, in order to potentially integrate on-premise systems with identity management providers that are in the cloud. All of this starts to surface up. You want to hone in on exactly the questions that you feel are foundational to every single person that you want to bring on board, and then you build and differentiate from there. So moving on, right, the hiring and onboarding is also something that truly, as a lesson learned for me, I had to figure out that, you know, you couldn't necessarily train somebody, right, and get them up to speed in 3 months and expect them to operate with somebody that already has been in that role for 2 years, right? There were a lot of managers that I've observed, that I've worked with and whatnot, that kind of had that expectation, right? So fundamentally for this one, right, really the key here that I learned is that have prescriptive activities such that, you know, we typically think of a 30, 60, 90-day window to onboard, right, after they come on board. And think about activities, very prescriptive activities that you can pair that new hire with a buddy or a mentor or whatnot, so that they can prescriptively work through those activities, right? I'm not talking about like, you know, compliance-related, company compliance-related courses. I'm talking about you understanding the job description, understanding who you're trying to hire for, and really prescriptively iron out those types of activities that would help them be a little bit more comfortable, right? Not necessarily fully productive, but comfortable to be learning on their own after they've been onboarded. You want to offer up a safe and nurturing learning environment. This was also a lesson learned that I, quite honestly, got hit over the head in the past 2 years, right? In the age of Zoom, in the age of everybody is virtual, how do you know that somebody is struggling to really ask questions, to get heard, to network, to, you know, feel free to fail, right? And ask really silly questions because they quite honestly don't know. They're on their own little island, right? It's really about offering a very consistent experience such that you're not asking them how far what have they accomplished, how far have they, you know, been gone through their onboarding program, like 2 months in, checking in with them every week, having very prescriptive, both company-related types of, you know, onboarding activities, as well as technical or product knowledge-related types of activities. That's super important. But you have to encompass that, right, especially in this day of a hybrid work environment, with making them feel safe and nurtured, right? They will never ask questions. I can guarantee you that, right? There will always be folks that just quite honestly think that they have to suffer through 8 hours of trying to figure out how to get something to integrate, or how to get, you know, how to discern whether or not they were building their lab incorrectly in order to figure out a SCIM protocol, right? So that in and of itself then takes you to, now that they've been onboarded, and again, onboarded does not necessarily equate to fully productive and self-sufficient, right? You still want to give them a little bit of a safety net. This is about then giving them the opportunity to continuously learn, continuously educate themselves, right? Bottom line is we are in a phase whereby it's not only hiring, but it's also retention of employees that is hard, right? How do you make the role continuously exciting, continuously like they want to do this because they want to and not because they have to? And this is about giving them opportunities to cross-train each other, right? Building the team morale, but also going to conferences, getting them to really do self-certifications or to take certifications, right? Self-learning, things of that nature. Because bottom line is, at the end of the day, you are unfortunately, when you're thinking about building high-performing teams, there are business initiatives tied to it. You as a manager are going to be continuously looked at for performance, for output, things of that nature, right? And so from a continuously measure and execute aspect, defining success criteria, defining it to the team, but also continuing to market the success of your teams, both upwards, outwards, and downwards, right? The internal transfers are going to come right when other folks feel like your team is the team to really want to join, as well as the executives themselves, right? They're going to look at you as, we've given you X number of headcount, Alice. What are you going to produce for us with this? And your team itself is going to look at you and say, great, how are we going to get measured, right? What is it that we do that is going to make a difference at the end of the day to the company? And so by continuously measuring, continuously figuring out how to tie, from a top-down perspective, really drives the successes at the end of the day. But you as a manager, right, need to also market. Need to market to the team, need to market the individuals in order to really showcase, right, this high-performing team. And finally, when we think about career path, right? So remember, I said this is a cyclical equation. Folks are going to get bored after a certain number of years in the same role, right? Even if you give them a career path, they're going to somewhat look at other opportunities because they are bored or they need a different challenge. And so the career promotion / coaching out is an extremely important step because it's not trying to get somebody fired if they don't cut it or if they're not performing or if they don't want to take the same career path or grow with you in the team on this career path, right? You want to set the career path. That is absolutely the right thing to do because you always want to give them something else to reach for, to achieve, right? But also, as you are measuring, as you are setting the bar, raising the bar year after year, setting the success criteria, communicating the successes of the team upwards and outwards, you also are going to have to realize that sometimes you're going to have to be really empathetic and coach somebody out of this role, whether it's into an internal role or obviously externally outside of the company, right? Because once you do that, when you have a career promotion or when you coach somebody out, the cycle starts again. So very quickly to highlight these last two pieces here. As a manager, right, to highlight, as a manager, you are responsible for what success is defined as. Communicating that, right, but also to be marketing the team's successes and to understand how to be agile, right, about changing business initiatives and things of that nature in order to continuously align your team against that. As an individual contributor, for those of you who are ICs, right, it is your destiny. You own your own destiny, right, to be able to continue to maintain your competitive edge. So understand your role, network, knowledge share. Establish your own brand and not just contribute to your team's brand, right? And then maintain your product and industry knowledge. This last part, I wanted to stick into the slide, and I know I'm running out of time, but this one is super important for me. Because ultimately, when I think about why diversity is so important in terms of really building, nurturing, or maintaining and scaling high-performing teams at a global scale, this part is what resonates with me the most. And it is because it really got re-emphasized during the pandemic for me, but it is about the fact that diverse representation is critical, right? In the identity and access management space, we are here to understand that, quite honestly, our attackers, right, are diverse, right? And to represent the entities who are also diverse that you're protecting. Different abilities or improved abilities to troubleshoot, looking at problem sets in a different fashion, right? That is what diversity really provides at the end of the day. So working with your recruiters, reaching out into your network to really focus on that is why this piece here, really critical, and quite honestly, I am very, very passionate about. The other aspect is representation matters, right? So the previous session was about learning and providing, educational courses and things of that nature, but it's also about formulating and really creating representation such that folks that would have never thought about identity and access management as a career, right, can find somebody relatable, right? I mean, when people look at me, they're like, you don't have an identity background, but I actually do. And I've had it ever since the beginning of my career, because that is my foundation. So diversity absolutely, absolutely matters, and it is super important, right, that you take that into consideration as you build out your team at scale. So I'll just leave you with this. These are things that I've already touched upon, but if you take nothing away from today's conversation, and it is a conversation, and I hope we continue to have this conversation, whether it's at this conference or elsewhere, right? Leveraging existing team members' knowledge to streamline that sourcing, that recruiting, and that interviewing process, super critical, super important, because that's going to shorten your time, right? Keeping this process straightforward will help you maintain a competitive edge over your competitors. Knowing the success criteria that the team is being held to, I can't say that enough. The business is always going to change, and so you yourself have to change along with it, right? The success criteria will change. And then finally, be agile and empathetic. I can't say that enough, especially in a virtual environment, right? Know that we're all adults, we're all working extremely hard, but you also have to put a stake in the ground and know when to coach an existing member into a new role, because at the end of the day, the less time you spend with your actual team that is productive, right? That means you're spending more time on team members that are not. So with that, I will open it up to questions. Yes, sir.
What are some of the things that you've done to sort of like foster culture in the remote climate?
So that's a great question. Your name? David, thank you for asking that. The question was, how do you foster a team camaraderie or culture, right, in this type of climate, especially in the remote working climate? And quite honestly, I will say it's hard, right? It is very hard, especially because I've had a team that, quite honestly, was global. So talk about not being able to hold a virtual happy hour when you're like, the folks in Singapore are probably not going to be drinking at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? But I do encourage you to do that. As a manager, you really need to give opportunities for folks to just get together and, quite honestly, not talk about work, right? Or to get together and to talk about work. The other tip that I will give you is potentially do that without you there. Have the team get together without the manager there. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
My name's Billy.
Billy? Lovely to meet you.
Are there any red flags that you commonly see for identifying when it's time to coach someone out?
Yeah. So the 3 red flags that I will give you, and this is just my 2 sorry, this is just my 2 cents. One is really the negative nature that they bring to team meetings, right? If they're always negative, if they're always, not necessarily, there's always a better way to provide feedback, right, to anybody. And if they show that it is more so feedback given in a negative manner, that is typically the first red flag. The second red flag is the fact that they're just not interested in producing. And you can tell as a manager who potentially, maybe not if you've been the manager for them and have only been managing them for 3 months, but over a course of 9 to 12 months, you'll be able to tell when their productivity drops, right? If you're asking them to continuously hit certain milestones and they're not hitting it, and they constantly don't give you a heads up that they're not going to hit it, right? That's a productivity red flag. And then the third one is, in essence, this is not necessarily a observation red flag, but, I've also had the experience whereby I've heard through the grapevine that they've been, interviewing or talking to other folks within the company about a new role, right? But that's not necessarily a red flag in terms of completely negative. That's an opportunity for you to go and explore and say, hey, are you unhappy? Have that direct conversation, right? And maybe figure out, okay, I as your manager, I'm going to be super supportive of you trying to find another role. I just need to know that that's where your head is at, right? You always want to be supportive. Hopefully that helps. I'll take one last question because I know I am between you guys and adult beverages. So any other questions, final questions? All right. Oh. Yeah.
I'm really fortunate that I have teams all over the world as well. And one thing that I find is embracing those cultural differences.
Yes.
Really brings the team together, because if we're all the same, sorry, I'm like a middle-aged white guy. If we're all the same middle-aged white guy, it gets kind of boring. But I have team members in South America and Canada and Europe and Asia, and we embrace those cultural differences. We allow us to ask questions and experience new cultures through those virtual relationships that I think has made our teams really strong.
Yeah, no, and I'm super glad. Your name? Mike. Lovely to meet you, Mike. No, this slide, honestly, I am super passionate about. I could literally talk a full day on this, right? Because to Mike's point, this is how you build teams quickly, how you market teams in order for other folks to be very excited about joining. And it is diversity that is actually going to essentially produce better results, in my honest opinion. Obviously, everyone to their own, but this is one area where I really, really think that, fostering and really building relatable role models, this is how we continue to mature in the identity and access management industry. Okay? Again, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you've had a wonderful conference, and drinks that way.